Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Mario, and I'm going to be talking about hermeneutics and mediation and how to integrate both ancestral wisdom and modern science for the psychedelic renaissance. So, I'm from Mexico, and Mexico is the richest country in psychoactive plants and mushrooms, according to Gordon Wasson and Richard Evan Schultz, The Planet of the Gods. Mexico, it's also host to a great diversity of indigenous cultures that make use of these sacred plants. Um, it is from this rich soil of indigenous sacred traditions that the psilocybin containing mushroom came to be known to the world. Um, that was in 1952 when the encounter of Gordon Wasson and Maria Sabina, the Mazatec mushroom healer, came into contact with each other, meeting both worlds. And then from then on, the Western sciences has been transformed by the finding of lots of benefits from the Mazatec sacred technology. Um, the psychedelic community has taken very big steps after this, and we have walked so far now. The road ahead of us, the psychedelic movement, seems to be bright and promising. However, I believe that before we continue walking, we should take a look back and see if there is something missing on the road. Very recently, there was an article published in Chacruna webpage, and it says psychedelics are currently undergoing a renaissance in psychiatry, with psilocybin at the forefront. However, this important substance is tainted by original sin. Science has never paid off its historical debt to the Mazatec people of Mexico, who preserved this psychoactive substance for posterity. In another article called Ethical Concerns About Psilocybin Intellectual Property, the authors said that from an indigenous perspective, psilocybin research and drug development tells a story of extraction, cultural appropriation, bioprospecting, and colonization. In It's for this situation that Ismail Ali from MAPS says that, for now, companies commercializing traditional medicine should divert some funds to provide support for indigenous people, but that is just one step. I believe that before we keep doing more research and advance in the Western psychedelic science, it would be wise to question the way that we are currently operating within the psychedelic community. So the psychedelic Renaissance movement situation characterizes itself by several precepts that come actually from modern Western worldview. And this is the Western scientific worldview as the dominant perspective, the fragmented and uncommunicated knowledges, meaning that each discipline focuses on its own domain without breaching these knowledges to the other disciplines. And it is centered on the individual's healing, missing the social and cosmological implications of work with psychedelics. This way of building science ignores the importance of indigenous people, ancestral knowledges, practices, and worldviews. I believe this entails some ethical dilemmas. Um, so I ask myself, how can we avoid an oppressing imposition, colonization, and cultural extractivism from one culture to the other, mainly from Western culture to the indigenous people? Is it possible to integrate both ancestral wisdom and modern science? And can we work in a more reciprocal and cooperative way together? To answer those questions, I believe we need a new kind of player in the psychedelic arena. So I propose that we need a mediator to balance the different players in the psychedelic arena. And this mediator should take into account a philosophical and methodological approach that's called hermeneutics. So what is hermeneutics? Hermeneutics is, believes that truth is an interpretation coming from a specific point of view. That means we cannot access to the whole truth in a objective, absolute way. Each interpretation reveals a unique aspect of truth, and so we can no longer just count on one perspective to understand the whole phenomena. It's ethics, its way of relating to the other. It values the other ways of being in the world and looks to create an ethical and respectful dialogue with it. And it operates by building bridges of communication and honoring the ineffable mystery that goes beyond language and beyond each perspective. Hermeneutics is inspired by the Greek god Hermes. He's a god of language, communication, mediation, inter-exchange, and magic. He was also revered by the alchemist as Mercury, the conciliator of solid and liquid, matter and spirit, psyche and cosmos. So what I propose is the role of the mediator would be to communicate the different dimensions of reality, meaning not just focusing on one domain, either the psyche domain, which has been taken by psychology, the society domain, which has been studied by anthropology, and the cosmological dimension, which has been taken by philosophy. So how can an hermeneutical approach contribute in each dimension? Well, for that, I'm gonna be focusing on each of these individual dimensions and how hermeneutics can help us work with this. First, in the cosmological dimension, I believe that hermeneutics can create conceptual bridges of communication between worldviews, looking for similarities and honoring the ineffable mystery beyond language. That is, I believe, except for Roland Griffith's studies on the important role of spirituality and mystical experience in the individual healings, very few studies or works has been made on the cosmological implications of psychedelics. And since I'm a philosopher from profession, I'd like to focus a bit more on this aspect. So, hermeneutics of myth and symbols is a branch of philosophy and multidisciplinary studies that has studied different symbols and myths from cultures all over the world. And some authors such as Aldous Huxley, Ken Wilber, Joseph Campbell, Mircea Eliade, among others, have been studying the underlying universal doctrine that has been known as a perennial philosophy, that which is the same in every culture, except it changes names and symbols. Also, Aldous Huxley and Stanislav Grof said that psychedelics can open us to this perennial philosophy that is commonly reported in the psychedelic experiences. So what does this perennial philosophy says? It says basically that reality is way much more than we perceive. That it is multidimensional and it has layers that we can perceive through different states of consciousness. That is what the anthropologist McLaughlin says, the polyphasic perception, meaning that these ancestral cultures, indigenous people, and mystical religious traditions believe that not just a regular state of consciousness is valuable, but also other states of consciousness that can be accessed through trance, dreams, and expanded states of consciousness, such as entheogenic visions. It also says that every being is interconnected to a bigger whole. That means that the individual is not isolated from its environment. So psyche is not separated from society, and society in itself is not separated to the whole of the cosmos. Within this perspective, sickness is understood as being disconnected from the bigger whole. Another principle of this perennial philosophy, it says that time is measured as a recurrent cycles of the eternal present. That means they believe that there is just one reality, and that this reality uh, is not linear. It means it comes once and again to certain cycles. So therefore, they value that which has always been, and that which will always be. And lastly, they believe that behind the multiplicity of phenomena, there is a divine unity and cosmic consciousness. That means that nature and the whole universe is aware of itself, and it is a being that encompasses us all, and has been known as either God, or the void, or the Great Spirit, or in different cultures, such as the Lakota, like Huancatanca, in the pre-Hispanic Mexico, as Ometeotl or Tloquenahuaque, among other names. So in contrast to this, the modern worldview holds it's a monophasic consciousness culture. That means that we regard ordinary states of consciousness as the only valuable cognitive state, and therefore it perceives only one dimension of reality. It is a culture that perceives the individual as fragmented to the whole, and it is therefore an ego-centered culture. Um, Modern worldview also holds that time is a linear and ever-changing progressive arrow, and therefore values only the new and the future. It forgets the ancestral knowledges, and it tries to raise that which has been in the past. And finally, it is a disenchanted world, neglecting the spiritual dimension, and therefore it believes that nature is just a blind and unconscious force that can be exploited for human benefit. So this worldview is the one that has taken us into so much problems, such as environmental crisis and pollution, consumerism, social injustice, poverty, mental health problems, and existential crisis, among others. Um, I wonder if is the modern worldview lacking connectedness with nature and the spiritual dimensions, and therefore can the study of different worldviews, such as the indigenous cultures, help us reconnect to the sacred nature and sacred dimension of the universe? Okay, so in the second dimension, the social dimension, the mediator would need to help create a reciprocity and social justice between the different players in the psychedelic arena. That is something that the Chakruna Institute has been talking about, and it's actually about to launch this indigenous reciprocity initiative of the Americas. Also, Nyerika Institute, it tries to preserve the sacred traditions of indigenous people with sacred plants. And so the mediator will need to connect these movements to the whole psychedelic community. And finally, in the psychic dimension, um, the mediator will need to question the way modern psychotherapy and psychiatry is working. So the Western healing methods focus mainly on the individual's healing and separates the physical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions of being. Instead, we can learn to integrate the ancestral wisdom. So the mediator would need to find a hybrid and intercultural model for treatment that integrates the ancestral healing methods, such as group ceremonies, chants, myths, storytelling, ritual, among others. This to come in collaboration with modern psychotherapy and psychiatry. This is something that people like Francois Boursat and Ania Loizaga are trying to do by searching for intercultural models of healing. So I believe that right now we are in the psychedelic movement at a crossroads where we can either ignore the ancestral other that preceded us, or we can change the narrative and integrate in a more collaborative and reciprocal way, uh, honoring those that have preceded us as protectors of the sacred plants and holders of this ancestral wisdom. So I believe hermeneutics is a very valuable tool or approach to mediate and reconcile the science of the future and the ancestral knowledges of indigenous culture, bridging modern progress with the eternal wisdom of the mystics. So which way are we headed? Thank you, and I'll leave you my contact in here. Goodbye.